This is the Hasselblad 907X with the CFV 100C back on it. It is by far one of the most inspiring digital cameras and one of the most beautiful digital cameras that I've ever seen and am fortunate enough to own. And despite some of its limitations, one of my favorite ways to use this is actually to adapt some 35mm format lenses onto a 44x33, kind of like a Super 645 sensor. So today we're going to explore how some of these Leica lenses actually work on this. What are some of the downsides, and is it ultimately worth buying an adapter for this system if you already have some M-mount lenses? Now, this video isn't sponsored by Hasselblad. I did receive this camera as part of a campaign I did with them earlier in the year, but they have no idea I'm making this video. And obviously, they probably don't want me talking about Leica stuff if it was a sponsored video. So I think that makes it fairly clear that I'm making this on my own. These are my thoughts and my thoughts only. Now, one of the first things to know about this system is the fact that yes, it is a medium format camera. And so the sensor is essentially like a 44x33 versus a 35mm sensor is a 36x24, roughly, depending on the sensor, which means that not all of these lenses are going to fully fill the sensor. Sometimes you're going to get hard edges. Sometimes you're going to get weird vignetting. Sometimes you're going to get weird shifts in the focus from what's called field curvature. But part of that also allows some of these lenses to expand a little bit more outside of their normal format, which then increases the character and looks pretty cool on a camera like this. The other thing about this is just how wild it is that this is a medium format camera and I can toss these tiny little lenses on there and get some really cool images with really good character. And while there's going to be a lot of people in the comments saying like, oh, you're just bastardizing a 100 megapixel camera, why would you ever do this? The point here is artistic expression, right? This is not about perfection. I'm not going to shoot architecture with this kind of stuff. I'm not doing art reproduction. I'm going for something that's going to be different. I'm going for a look, lots of things that are not going to be clinical perfection. And so if you are doing that, Hasselblad makes incredible lenses. The new V series is fantastic. Using the 38V, the 55V, the 90V, all of their other lenses, incredible. If you want amazing optical performance, go with their native lenses. They are fantastic. This is more along the lines of an artistic expression, which kind of is what I feel like this camera in particular lends itself to as well. Some things to know about this. This camera does not have an internal shutter. So I'm opening this up. This is the sensor. You're not gonna have a shutter in front of it. There is no shutter in this camera. This is a very slow electronic readout. So you do need to know that if you're going to be doing something like this, motion, cars driving by, kids running, things like that are not going to photograph well on something like this. Now, the Hasselblad lenses themselves have a leaf shutter inside of them, so it makes that part totally fine, no issues at all. And they're incredible. They're leaf shutters. They can flash sync up to their full max speed. Lots of amazing reasons why those lenses are fantastic. But if you are going to adapt lenses like this, you do not have that internal shutter into one of these adapters. If they could somehow make an M-mount adapter that had a leaf shutter in it, I mean, that'd be incredible. But it's not something that this system allows you to do. So it does put some limitations on the way you're going to use this. This is a sad reality, but if you do want to use this format, the best recommendation that I can have to try to avoid some of those warping and some of that rolling shutter is to switch the bit depth here from quality from 16-bit to 14-bit. That is going to make the sensor readout at about twice as fast as if you're using the 16-bit mode. Now, is the 16-bit mode one of my favorite parts about this camera? You get just like an incredible amount of color fidelity, depth. The transitions as you push the files are so much smoother. It's one of the things that draws me to this system and this sensor and all of this stuff in the first place. But it is one of those things where unless you have a very locked off scene, you're using a tripod, things like that, I'm always going to be opting for the 14-bit mode over the 16-bit mode because I would rather have slightly less color fidelity, slightly like less dynamic range, whatever, in a file over having a bit of warp and other issues like that. Can you use the 16-bit mode? Yeah, it's definitely possible. You can definitely use it. The other thing about this camera in particular that the X2D does have that this does not is this does not have any sort of IBIS. If you are shaking the camera yourself, that's going to be more on you than the scene. Another reason why using the 14-bit mode is just a very, very good idea. Again, with this kind of setup, we're going more for artistry. We're going for and we're going to be a little bit more okay with imperfections, things like that, than if we're going for a more clinical look. It is a big downside. Definitely will let you know that. But any full frame camera, any high-end full frame camera, anything like that, they're all doing 14-bit RAW files anyway. So you're still getting very, very great files. They're just not as deep and they don't have as much color depth, all that kind of stuff, than if you were shooting in the 16-bit mode. Now, the other thing about that is just that some of these lenses will cover the sensor better than others. This is the Light Lens Lab 35mm 8-element Summicron kind of lens here. It definitely has a lot of field curvature. It doesn't cover the full sensor. It just has a lot more issues, but does it give off a really cool vintage look? Absolutely. And all the lenses that I've tried, if they fit on full frame, they are all pretty much going to work at a 1:1 ratio. A very surprising lens to me that worked well on this is the Typoc Eureka. This thing is tiny and collapsible and small and very, very interesting. And oddly enough, it covers the full sensor. So I've been using this a little bit, and here are some image samples as well from this Typoc Eureka. And if you just want to put together a little camera like this that you definitely are not going to be thinking when you're walking around using this camera, people are not going to assume that this is a modern camera. You're going to get a lot of interesting looks, and I don't know, it's just like, what a crazy vibe this is. It just honestly works really well and is super, super interesting. Now, I think one of the most fun things is being able to use a high-end Leica lens like this 35 Summilux on a Hasselblad. First of all, it just looks incredible. It is so small and lightweight, and the results obviously are going to be pretty good as well. So it's kind of like a best of both worlds type scenario. Now, I think where a lot of people kind of have issue is using a kind of third-party lens like this Typoc Samara. I actually found this 28mm as well as the other lenses to work really, really well. All of these lenses just balance so well on this camera. And even at 1.4, they do pretty well. Like, it's pretty crazy how good the image quality is. Now, one of the other options is to use something like this Midicon 65 1.4. It definitely does not balance nearly as well. It doesn't look that bad when you're doing it, but the lens itself just being so large makes the balance here pretty ridiculous. I think it does probably balance a lot better on the X2D, but even if you buy a lens like this or some of the other ones that I've used in the past as well, you are gonna have to use that same electronic shutter thing. So I've definitely used this lens in particular a few times and tried to get photos as I'm walking, as couples are walking, and it just doesn't work that well, to be honest. So one of the things you're going to have to do is if you are using this and people are moving at all, you just need to kind of go in and check to see, is there some movement there? Is there some weird stuff that's a little bit out of place that I'm not necessarily noticing right now? Because it's one of those things where you might not end up noticing, and then later on you might end up delivering a photo to a client and you might think, oops, I kind of messed that one up. Now, to be honest, is the 907X in particular the best of the medium format cameras to do this on? Definitely not. I think it's probably, of the 100 megapixel ones, probably technically the worst from a technical perspective, right? It doesn't have IBIS. It doesn't have a shutter. But there's just something about this camera in particular, how small it is, how beautiful it is, especially when you put these tiny little lenses on there, that's just like, ooh, that is intriguing. It makes me interested. It makes me want to pick it up. And if I am out taking photos with it, the amount of people that are like, whoa, what is that? I mean, it makes a difference, right? So ultimately, is putting Leica lenses onto this system a good idea? From a head standpoint, no. Like there's plenty of reasons why this shouldn't work very well. But from a heart perspective, absolutely. I think that I probably wouldn't buy this camera just to do this. I would definitely want to have something like the 38V or the 55V as kind of like a mainstay lens, and then allow these other lenses to be kind of just like your fun, different, quirky stuff. And honestly, it's just a really fun little system and a fun little experience. So thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to watch my video on the 50C version of this, you can check that out up here. Check out another video I did with the 50.95 up here, and I will see you in one of those videos.